At your trial for the Section 5 offence, you gave evidence at considerable length. You maintained that much of what you had said and the virulently racist views that you had expressed, as set out in the timeline, and to some of which I have referred, were no more than intrusive thoughts and did not represent what you believed in real life. It was, in effect, although you did not use these words, hyperbole, bravado, and fantasy, and you never had any intention to carry out an attack of any description. Remain seated. Alfie Coleman, you're now aged 22. I have to sentence you for 10 offences of possession of a document for terrorist purposes, contrary to Section 58 of the Terrorism Act 2000. One offence of attempting to possess a prohibited firearm, and one offence of attempting to obtain prohibited ammunition. You first appeared before this court in relation to those matters on the 27th of October 2023, when no pleas were indicated, but you pleaded guilty to each of them at the preparatory hearing on the 8th of April 2024. I also have to sentence you for one offence of preparation of terrorist acts, contrary to Section 5 of the Terrorism Act 2006, of which you were convicted by a jury on the 30th of April of this year, following a retrial, the original jury having been unable to reach a verdict. The factual background to these offences, which was encapsulated in the timeline document, began in November 2020. You were aged 16 at the time. It was in the middle of COVID, as has been observed, and the events continued until the date of your arrest at the end of September 2023, when you were 19. It is apparent that during this time you had become increasingly infatuated and obsessed with neo-Nazism and had developed a virulent hatred of Muslims, people of colour and Jews. To that end, you had downloaded a significant number of extreme right-wing documents and publications as follows, and I will refer firstly to those, the subject matter of the Section 58 offences to which you have pleaded guilty. The Anarchist Cookbook, which contained chapters on drugs, electronics, sabotage, surveillance, natural, non-lethal and lethal weapons, explosives and booby traps. It also contains recipes or lists of ingredients for the manufacture of a range of viable explosives and concludes with some information on detonators and examples of various improvised explosive devices. The White Resistance Manual, which provides detailed guidance on how to develop violent attacks on civilian populations using means such as guns, bomb making and improvised explosive devices, poisoning and arson, and provides guidance on issues such as evading police detection. It articulates an extreme right-wing vision for sparking a race war leading to a revolution and a new era for white people, which it argues is necessary for white survival. It states that contemporary democracy has been corrupted by a Jewish conspiracy. Expedient Homemade Firearms, a document with detailed instructions as to a list of materials and tools required for the construction of a 9mm parabellum caliber submachine gun. Expedient Homemade, a document with detailed instructions for the construction of bulleted ammunition. Homemade C4, a recipe for survival, a document which provides information as to the manufacture of a viable secondary high explosive using a number of different components. Home Workshop Explosives, a document providing information as to the manufacture of viable explosives. The Terrorist Explosives Handbook, a document providing a historical overview of improvised explosive devices and improvised incendiary devices and information on viable explosive substances. Improvised Primary Explosives, a document providing information as to the manufacture of a number of viable explosives and primers. 21 Techniques of Silent Killing, a manual of methods of assassination requiring silence, close contact, and the intent to leave the scene without being apprehended. Put 'em down, take 'em out, a document containing chapters on the basics of knife fighting myths, knife attack, knife defense, and training. Other items downloaded by you, but not the subject of any count on the indictment, included the following: the SS Leadership Guide, Did 6 Million Really Die?, Aryanity, all these concerning Nazi ideology. Dylan Roof's Manifesto, he being a person who in 2015 murdered 9 black people at a church in Charleston, South Carolina. He later confessed he committed the shooting in the hope of igniting a race war. Siege, an essential text at the centre of militant accelerationism, being a collection of short non-fiction articles, mostly written by James Mason, which frames the need for a violent revolution to overthrow liberal democracy and promote the needs of white people. The Great Replacement, the manifesto of Brenton Tarrant, published before he killed 51 Muslims in New Zealand in 2019. Mein Kampf, Hitler's manifesto. And at one point you posted a message: I don't follow the words of anyone except Adolf Hitler. The manifesto of John Ernest, setting out why he committed an attack in a synagogue in April 2019, in which 1 person was killed and 3 were injured. 88 Precepts, a reference to Hitler, written by David Lannett, setting out a list of statements on what he called natural law, being a treatise on his views on race, politics, and philosophy. There came a time when you had just read the Turner Diaries, a novel by an American neo-Nazi, published in 1978, which set out a fictionalized blueprint for a white revolution. You made a note on your phone to the effect that you just finished the 10-hour-long audiobook, and you stated, quote, "Wow, just wow. Although it is my first book, it is the greatest text I think there will ever be." Professor Jackson, who gave expert evidence at the trial, described this publication as super influential and deeply racist. It included a chapter referred to as the Day of the Rope, in which tens of thousands of white Americans were publicly hanged for being race traitors. Hunter, the sequel to the Turner Diaries, about a lone individual who embarked on a plan to assassinate interracial couples and public figures who advocated civil rights. Towards Militant Accelerationism, a collective handbook. Accelerationism being a term used by right-wing extremists referring to an acceleration of racial conflict through assassinations, murder and terrorist attacks as a means to violently achieve a white ethno-state. Sometime in 2023, the authorities had become aware of your extreme right-wing views and you were placed under surveillance. From July of that year, undercover operatives made contact with you in various chat rooms. To them you expressed the need for a violent revolution in order to bring about the so-called 14 words in the white supremacist slogan, quote, "We must secure the existence of our people and a future for white children," unquote. To this end, with those operatives, you set about seeking to secure possession of a gun and ammunition. There was talk about you going to Reims for such a purchase, and you carried out a good deal of research about the trip, but never actually went. Late in September 2023, however, unbeknown to you that you were dealing and negotiating with an undercover officer, and having withdrawn cash from your building society account, by arrangement, you went to the Morrison's car park in Stratford and handed over £3,500 for a Makarov pistol, 5 magazines and 200 rounds of ammunition. These had in fact been deactivated unbeknown to you, and you were arrested at the scene. Following your arrest, your home address was searched, and amongst the recovered items were the following: 4 knives you purchased on Amazon, 5 empty gun magazines, a black sun flag, a symbol originating in Nazi Germany and being later employed by neo-Nazis and other far-right individuals and groups. Also the Totenkopf flag depicting a human skull, this being a symbol for death. The term being commonly associated with German military use, particularly in Nazi Germany. Also recovered was a mask with an image of a skull found with militant accelerationist cultures, a home-day Faraday cage used to block radio signals, a bottle with a rag in it in the mode of a Molotov cocktail, although to be fair to you, it did not contain any petrol or accelerant. Amongst items that were recovered from your electronic devices that were seized were the following: a document that you had written entitled Collapse, which contained the postcode for the address of the Lord Mayor of London. It also contained the ingredients and methodology to make HMD, a component in explosives. It referred to ATMs having a center console around neck height, and it detailed weapons that you could obtain easily. A further document that was recovered, which had also been written by you, was entitled The List. It was a list of around 25 registration plates of vehicles of individuals you had encountered through your work as a cashier at the petrol station at your local Tesco store. It was essentially a list described by you in extremely racist and provocative language as relating to race traitors, that is, white people who had partners of colour. You also wrote a manifesto or diary from which the following is an extract. Quote, "First and foremost, I want it to be known I carried out this attack alone. The money was mine. Nobody knew about my plans or helped me in any way. I am the only person involved. This operation was carried out solely by me. The operation is a response to the centuries' worth of injustice against my folk by the Jews and their lapdogs. The text is not the ramblings of a madman. I am perfectly sane. I have no mental health issues and never have. Find and execute the enemies of our race wherever they manifest themselves, no matter their age or gender. Violence is the only thing they understand. Let's show them violence. All people who are not on our side must die. Plain and simple. Every Muslim, My plan is not to be taken alive by the system. If you could not tell by me committing this attack, I support Dylan Roof, Anders Breivik, Brenton Tarrant, Robert Matthews, Tommy Mayer, Robert Powers, David Copeland, Dmitry Borovikov. I could list such warriors for hours. These are just some I felt like listing, due to them having the most impact on me personally. These individuals to whom you referred had carried out murders in different parts of the world, in many cases mass murders that were racially motivated. Following lengthy police interviews, at all of which you went no comment, you were remanded in custody, and a few weeks later, prison staff found in your cell various notes that you had written, including various Nazi runes and symbols that you had drawn, together with the following, from which I will simply take extracts. You referred to what you described as the trumped-up charges on which you had been arrested. And you said, quote, I remain steadfast in my duties to my people and above all, to secure the existence of my people and a future for white children. Under no circumstances will I betray my race in return for less jail time. There is no force strong enough, no power high enough, which would make me capitulate to this illegitimate government. Long live the Aryan resistance, long live the Aryan race, hail Hitler, unquote. At your trial for the Section 5 offence, you gave evidence at considerable length. You maintained that much of what you had said and the virulently racist views that you had expressed, as set out in the timeline, and to some of which I have referred, were no more than intrusive thoughts and did not represent what you believed in real life. It was, in effect, although you did not use these words, hyperbole, bravado, and fantasy, and you never had any intention to carry out an attack of any description. As to the gun, magazines and ammunition that you'd purchased for £3,500, you stated that you had a very long-standing keen interest in and knowledge of guns. You went on to claim, notwithstanding the considerable sum of money you'd paid for the gun and ammunition, that you only ever intended to use it to do target practice in the fields near to where you lived, and that other than that you would keep it by your bed in the family home you occupied with your parents and sister, a claim which I note you have maintained to the author of the pre-sentence report. By their verdict, the jury clearly did not accept your account. I turn next to the sentencing guidelines, and in your case there are 4 sets of guidelines which have a relevance. The terrorism offences sentencing guidelines, the firearms guidelines, the guidelines relating to sentencing children and young people, and the guidelines relating to offenders with mental disorders, developmental disorders, or neurological impairments. I shall deal with each of these in turn, beginning with the terrorism offences guidelines. It goes without saying that by far the most serious offence with which I have to deal is that of preparation of terrorist acts under Section 5 of the Terrorism Act 2006, that being the offence of which you were convicted by the jury. And I shall take that as being the lead offence and make the other sentences concurrent. Having presided over 2 trials in the course of which, as I've said, you gave evidence over several days, I am best placed to make an assessment as to both culpability and harm. Dealing firstly with culpability, prosecution submit in relation to this Section 5 offence that it is a culpability B case, in that you were acting alone, preparations were advanced, and but for apprehension, the activity was likely to have been carried out. Mr. Rutherford, King's Counsel on your behalf, accepts that this is a correct categorisation, although he contends that whilst the preparations were advanced, they were not advanced to the degree contended for by the prosecution. The prosecution further submit that it was, quote, very likely, unquote, that you would have carried through with your intention once you had acquired the gun and ammunition, given your persistent efforts to do so over several months, as well as the length of time in which you had an intention to commit a terrorist act. Mr. Rutherford submits that, quote, likely, as opposed to very likely, would be a fairer conclusion to reach. I note that for the purposes of culpability B, where an individual is acting alone as you were, the test is whether the activity was, quote, likely to have been carried out. The requirement for, quote, very likely, applying in a case of culpability A, for which the prosecution do not contend. That said, the reason the prosecution do not say this is category A is because they accept that your preparations were neither complete nor close to completion, but they submit that it being very likely that you would carry through with your intention, that is capable of moving you up within the category range. So far as this aspect of the case is concerned, having considered the competing submissions, I am just prepared to give you the benefit of the doubt, not least as there is no evidence at all that you had planned out or decided exactly what you were going to do, nor when, nor where you were going to carry out an attack. Turning next to the issue of harm, the prosecution submit this as a Category 1 harm case, having regard to the fact that multiple deaths were risked and were very likely to be caused based upon your intention, in that they assert that your plan was to carry out a mass casualty attack using a self-loaded pistol with 5 preloaded magazines. Mr. Rutherford, on the other hand, argues that this is a Category 2 harm case. I have not found this an easy issue to resolve. On the one hand, you had acquired the gun and ammunition, a goal which you had been pursuing for quite some time, and with a degree of persistence. Although I note and accept that you had developed a freestanding and very keen interest in and knowledge of guns over a period of a number of years, starting when you were quite young. In addition, the prosecution point to your consistent rhetoric about the need to carry out a mass attack. On the other hand, as I have already observed, you did not appear to have formulated any specific plan as to its implementation. And although there was a great deal of talk about an attack in Reims, nothing in fact came of it. Indeed, in the event, you did not even travel there. And likewise with the supposed plan to hijack an aeroplane, which came to absolutely nothing. So although consistently with the verdict of the jury, I am bound to sentence you on the basis that you intended to commit an act of terrorism with a loaded gun, I find myself unable to be sure as to the full extent of what you would in fact have done had you not been apprehended. accordingly, I intend to sentence you on the basis that this is a case of Category 2 harm. It follows that as a Category B2 case, the starting point in the guidelines is life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 15 years and a range of life imprisonment with a minimum term of 10 to 20 years. So far as aggravating features are concerned, there are the following. 1, the offence was motivated by hostility based on religion and race. 2, your repeated possession and accessing of extremist material, as evidenced by the Section 58 offences. 3, your deliberate use of encrypted communications, in which you changed the platform that you used as well as your identity. 4, the duration over which the offences were committed. I shall deal with the mitigation later in these remarks. As to the Section 58 offences, the agreed position is that these are Category 1A offences with a starting point of 10 years and a range of 8 to 14 years. For these offences to which you pleaded guilty, there will be a discount of 25%. Turning to the firearms offences, in relation to the attempted possession of a firearm and ammunition, the agreed position is that these are Category 1A offences with a starting point of 3 years and a range of 2 to 5 years. For these offences to which you also pleaded guilty, there will again be a discount of 25%. Turning next to the sentencing guidelines for children and young persons, although you are now 22 and the Section 5 offence and the offences under the Firearms Act were committed by you when you were 19, the Section 58 offences were committed by you when you were under 18 and 3 of them when you were 16. I'm also mindful of the fact, as emphasised by the Court of Appeal in a number of cases, including that of Kamara Jara, reported at 2024 EWCA Crim 198, that it is never just a question of mathematical age, and that age governs the normal starting point, but not the assessment of culpability by reference to maturity. The law recognises that children and young people do not think, make decisions, or regulate their emotions in the same way as fully mature adults, and therefore required to sentence you by reference to your age and level of maturity at the time of the offences, giving proper weight to rehabilitation and personal development, and to whether there is a realistic prospect that you can change. And I say in that regard that I accept the observations by Mr. Rutherford that you are intelligent, articulate, and, in my view, have potential, as is borne out by the references that I have read from your family, from the prison, as well as in the letter that you have written to me. I turn next to the guidelines relating to offenders with mental disorders, developmental disorders, or neurological impairments. I have reminded myself of the contents of reports from 2 psychologists, Dr. von Brandt and Dr. Farrelly, and a psychiatrist, Dr. Brown, as to your diagnosis of having traits of autistic spectrum disorder. Dr. von Brandt indicated that you struggle with empathy and that you meet the diagnostic criteria for mild autism, and this may have contributed as a relevant vulnerability. Dr. Farrelly states that you meet the diagnostic criteria for autistic spectrum disorder, and this is highly relevant to understanding your thinking and behaviour, including the need for order, rules, routines and predictability, obsessiveness, repetition, and connecting social interaction and communication difficulties, and that this is likely to have increased your vulnerability to becoming obsessive and repetitive in the pursuit of your interests. Also, that your interest in extreme right-wing material may have been increased by vulnerability to loneliness, emotional regulation difficulties, and developing unusual circumscribed interests. I take into account evidence of your emotional immaturity, social isolation, and difficulties in forming and maintaining appropriate relationships. These factors undoubtedly help explain how some of your behavior developed. They do not, however, excuse what you did. This is, after all, not a case of a single lapse or a moment of poor judgment. And I remind myself in that regard that you are before the court for repeated offending, and that much of the behaviour was planned, concealed and persistent and occurred over a prolonged period. Despite your age and neurodivergence, the seriousness of your offending means that only immediate and significant custodial sentences can properly reflect your overall criminality. I turn next to the question of dangerousness. The court is required to apply Section 308 of the Sentencing Act 2020 and to determine whether there is a significant risk to members of the public of serious harm occasioned by further specified offences. The Section 5 offence is a Schedule 19 offence, a serious terrorism offence, and a specified offence. I must consider in sequence under this heading custody for life, a serious terrorism sentence, an extended sentence, and if none of those apply, the special sentence for offenders of particular concern. The question as to whether there is a significant risk to members of the public of serious harm occasioned by the commission by you of further specified offences necessitates a forward-looking assessment. It is not answered simply by asking whether you are now remorseful, whether you have begun to engage with intervention, or whether rehabilitation is possible. It requires the court to consider all available information about the nature and circumstances of the offences and all relevant information about you. The view of the author of the pre-sentence report on this issue is that unless you engage meaningfully in long-term interventions, your likelihood of further Terrorism Act-related reoffending is high, and she assesses you as posing a very high risk of serious harm to the public because you are actively seeking opportunities to offend in purchasing the firearm which you could have used at any time had you not been arrested. In considering this issue, I've had regard to the facts of the offences and everything that I have read about you. As to the offences, I've taken into account in particular their duration, the extent of your fanaticism, the extreme and obsessive nature of your views, the amount of research that you undertook, the lengths to which you went to realise your long-standing and significant interest in guns and to obtain a gun and ammunition, and the significant amount of money you were prepared to pay given your limited means. And I've also taken into account the views that you are expressing even after your arrest and remand into custody. Bearing all of that in mind, I am satisfied that I must treat you as a dangerous offender. However, I do not impose custody for life. These offences are grave, but I do not consider that their seriousness in your case is such as to make a life sentence necessary or proportionate. your age, immaturity, autistic spectrum disorder traits, anxiety, vulnerability, lack of previous convictions, and the absence of actual physical harm caused by you, all, in my judgment, weigh heavily against a discretionary life sentence. Nor do I impose a serious terrorism sentence. The Section 5 matter is a serious terrorism offence, but I do not find the risk of multiple death condition satisfied in the statutory sense for the imposition of such a sentence. My finding under the guideline is that multiple deaths were risked, but were not very likely to be caused. I'm satisfied, however, that an extended sentence is necessary. A determinate sentence alone would not be sufficient to protect the public. You require a substantial custodial term during which specialist work can take place, followed by an extended license period during which your ideology, associations, internet use, emotional state, relationships, and susceptibility to influence and risk factors can be monitored. I said I would return to mitigation. As will be apparent from what I have already said, I take into account the following. 1, the fact that you have no previous convictions. 2, your age and lack of maturity at the time the offences were committed. 3, your mental health issues, insofar as the fact that you have traits of autistic spectrum disorder. And I accept that for much of the time with which this case is concerned, not least when the offences were committed during the COVID epidemic, you were isolated and lonely. 4, your guilty pleas to the matters other than the Section 5 offence. I've also borne in mind the following further matters. 1, the very difficult time that you've had since you have been in prison, including the fact that you've been attacked on a number of occasions. 2, the undoubted progress that you have made there, as I have read. 3, the letters from your family, your letter, and the other references to which I have already made reference. For the avoidance of any doubt, I have, of course, also had regard to totality. So the sentences that I impose will be as follows, concurrently in each case. For the Section 5 offence, as to the custodial element, I have taken 15 years as the starting point, according to the guidelines. As this is the lead offence, I increase that to 18 years to take account of the other offences. I discount that by 25% to take account of the mitigation, which means that the custodial element of that offence will be 13 and a half years. There will be an extended licence for 5 years. What that means is that you will serve 2/3 of that sentence, less the time already spent on remand, which I understand to be 1,013 days, at which time you will be eligible to apply for parole. As to the Section 58 offences, the custodial element will be 5 years, 8 months, taking as a starting point 10 years and allowing 25% discount for the mitigation and a further 25% discount for your plea. And there will likewise be an extended period of licence for 5 years. For the firearms offences, there will be a determinate sentence of 27 months on each. All sentences, as I say, to be concurrent. So what that means is that the total sentence will be one of 18 and a half years, of which the custodial element is 13 and a half years, with an extended licence for 5 years, and for the firearms offences a concurrent determinate sentence of 27 months.